inclusive. And amid all this, of course, oh yeah, there's climate change, right? While the impacts of extreme weather are being felt more and more around the world, environmentalists, climate experts, energy experts all tell us that so far our response is not strong enough to really stave off the worst consequences of a warming world. So what leaders choose to do or not to do in the next year, let alone the next 10, will really echo for generations. So let's get to it. I'm delighted to welcome our panelists for our opening session on leadership in an era of both peril and I think possibilities. Please join me in welcoming to the stage His Excellency Hashim Dojo Hakisumu, Indonesia's Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, Energy, and Environment, Laurence Tubiana, a key architect of the Paris Agreement and CEO of the European Climate Foundation, and Dr. Sephora Berman, Chair of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. Please join me in welcoming them. All right, great to be with you all. You guys hear me okay? Am I mic'd up? Good? All right. All right, let's jump into it. We all know that the stakes are really high. On one hand, climate change is getting worse. We're feeling these effects all the time. On the other hand, it feels like the markets and politics are constantly shifting. And all of this creates a really kind of challenging environment. So in this session, I hope that we can really dig into some of these bigger questions, such as, how do you lead when the ground is constantly moving? How can governments and businesses work together? A lot of times it seems that they're opposed. And what bold ideas are needed to move from where we are now to a point that we really do start to see a drop in emissions around the world? You guys are a great lineup to talk about these things. All right, my first question for you, Pak Hashim, is about Indonesia, how it really sits at a crossroads when it comes to climate of ambition and vulnerability. How do you approach these challenges that kind of mix the need for domestic development and trying to be part of longer-term climate goals?
Right. The reality is, Peter, that Indonesia is a major source or producer of fossil fuels. I mean, that's the reality. Indonesia is the second biggest producer of coal, and we are actually the largest exporter of seaborne coal. That's reality. A lot of the growth, a lot of the economy, a lot of the GDP of Indonesia comes from fossil fuels. However, Indonesia is one of the biggest victims of climate change. You know that we are an island nation, 70,000 islands. Many of those islands are disappearing because of rising sea levels. And the Indonesian government has been forced to announce an enormous public works project, infrastructure project. It's what they call, or what we call, the giant seawall, which is another name for a dike. We're building a huge dike, 800 kilometers long. It's probably going to be one of the biggest public works projects for the next 2 decades. And that is to protect the coastline of Java Island. Java Island is where more than 50% of Indonesia's population lives. A lot of the arable land is on the north coast. And that's why we have to build the seawall, because the rising sea levels, the rising seawater is actually inundating the best and most fertile arable land in Indonesia, in the whole of Indonesia. So that's the quandary we face, that's a reality. But the Indonesian government has announced a very ambitious electrification program. We intend to build 103 gigawatts of electricity generation in the next 15 years. Most of it, 75%, will be from renewable energy. We are blessed with a lot of solar potential, We are blessed with a lot of wind potential, which is something new to me. Wind potential, because there's a lot of shallow water around on the islands of Java, Bali, where most of the wind potential is. We also have a lot of geothermal, and now we actually have a lot of potential for biomass energy. And the next one, which is a bit more controversial, I recognize that, is nuclear. Indonesian government has decided to go nuclear. 10 gigawatts, that's the idea, the next 15 years. And then, did I mention biomass? Yeah, biomass, nature-based solutions. The Indonesian government, our president will announce tomorrow at the General Assembly, a program of 12 million hectares of reforestation of degraded forests. So we want to reforest Indonesia, and then we also want to encourage the development of the carbon markets and allowing investors to come in for offsets and the like. So that's the opportunity, that's the challenge, but also the opportunity.
Okay. Okay, and we'll follow up with a couple of those of the different things
Yeah.
that you all are investing in. Laurence, you are the COP30 envoy for Europe. I think Europe is often seen as a leader, particularly when it comes to climate policy. But there are these constant kind of headwinds, and I think there are some right now in Europe. So I wonder if you could spend a minute talking about the situation in Europe and how what's happening in the last year, particularly, what that may mean for climate cooperation, kind of around the globe at a time when people really look to Europe for leadership.
And thank you for that question, because we are at a crucial moment for Europe. Europe has always been a leader in climate policy. We have grown since 1990 from 60% the GDP, and at the same time reduce most than 40% of emission of greenhouse gases. So the proof of the concept was there that we could grow and at the same time decarbonize, with of course an evolution in technology that came in particular acceleration after the Paris Agreement conclusion. Now what is happening? On one side there was the invasion of Ukraine. Invasion of Ukraine offered a new space for the oil and gas fossil fuel industry to say we are representing the energy security, and we have spent more than 800 billion to compensate for the cost on the energy market. So the economic shock of the Ukraine war on the energy market has been a potential driver to say, oh, this is a lot of money, should not we finally keep to the fossil fuel sector because energy security is there. And the argument was relatively easy to make. Even if a number of policies repower EU in particular, meaning putting a lot of energy, there is more than 50% now electricity coming from renewable in Europe, almost 60%. So in a way, the movement is continuing, but there is, of course, the business model for renewable energy is more difficult today. On the other side, there is a political element we should not ignore. Not only Russia is pushing for trying to demonize climate policy, portraying themselves as elite policies against people, but now you have the US administration asking every country to drop climate policy, drop net zero by 2050, to come back to the imports of fossil fuels. So the geopolitics now are pushing against climate policy, with some exception. That's why it's so good to hear from what Indonesia was doing, even China with this program of really, we may have seen now the peaking year of emission in China and maybe now going down. So there are many movements in Brazil, and all the emerging countries are thinking about a new form of development. But Europe is true, it's at risk. And the interesting thing, we are not a big part of the global emission now. Even when you look at historical elements, still not that big. But every time Europe backtracks, there is an anxiety. Why is this? Because economically it's impossible, politically it's impossible. So that's why I think it's very important to push our EU politicians, colleagues, the presidents to stay firm and to present by COP30 an ambitious 2035 target and 2040 target, because that will give the confidence for other countries that are beginning the transition or accelerating their transition that they can do it, and they will not be economically disadvantaged to do that. And finally, Europe needs friends. And Europe of course, the trade relations, the trade war, allow us to go from, and I know the discussion with Indonesia are going on, with India, with others, to say we need a plan, we need a trade and investment partnership to develop the transition with cooperative aspect, and not to go for extractivism, just picking the resources out of a country and then fly, but at the contrary, develop the value chain in Indonesia, for example, all the issues you have been describing, Minister. And then on the other side, find a way to construct a coalition of countries that were for peace and security and co-development, puts that at the center of their discussion. So it's a crucial moment for Europe. I really hope my continent will choose the right way.
And maybe we shouldn't, just picking up on what you said, read too much into, I mean, there were lots of stories about how Europe couldn't agree on the updated nationally determined contribution ahead of Climate Week. But you've got some months.
We'll have it, I'm confident, we'll have
It'll be okay.
And it will be okay, and I hope it will be the higher range we need.
Okay, all right.
Anyway, we are just fighting for that.
Okay, all right. So this panel is about leadership in these times, and you've often urged governments to go a lot faster than they even thought, were possible. So I wonder if you could paint a picture for us of what you think leadership in these times is, what that looks like.
Thank you, Peter. I'd be delighted to. After 29 COPs and a decade since the Paris Agreement, we're still expanding fossil fuel production and projects. So today, the production gap report came out, and it shows that we're on track to produce 120% more oil, gas, and coal between now and 2050 than we can ever burn if we want to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. So I think there's a couple truisms here. There is no question that it's complicated, especially for countries in the global south. And that's why we need cooperation between countries, but not just on reducing emissions, also stopping expanding production. It's not a transition if we're growing the problem. And I think what we've seen in the past couple of years, the tripling of renewables, that's absolutely critical leadership. There's no question. And it is essential for countries to be strengthening their plans under the Paris Agreement, building electrification infrastructure, investing in renewables. But we can't just build the good stuff. We have to stop building the bad stuff, because the atmosphere doesn't care how many solar panels we build. The atmosphere cares how many fossil fuel projects we don't. And I think, so when we look at the question of what bold leadership looks like, it means that those in a position of power need to stop pretending they're climate leaders while supporting more drilling, more fracking, and more LNG. We have to stop expanding oil, gas, and coal, and we have to stop investing in fossil fuels. Yes, we need to invest in renewable energy and electrification, but I think real leadership looks like those who are willing to step out and join, for example, the bloc of almost 20 countries now that are cooperating in the development of a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty as a companion to the Paris Agreement, because we've been working together to try and reduce emissions, but we're just allowing production to grow. And our children and our communities are gasping for breath. They're choking. Our planet is literally on fire, and millions of people are dying from lethal heat and extreme weather and fossil fuel pollution. And so I think bold leadership means standing up to bullies, and it means standing up for science. I think bold leadership right now means prioritizing public safety. It means protecting lives and living systems. And the fossil fuel industry and dangerous leaders like Trump make this seem like it's a political or an ideological issue, but it's physics. Physics are physics. And the carbon trapped in our atmosphere is smothering us. And if we drill, baby, drill like he wants, then more people will die, quite literally. Fossil fuels are now the greatest cause of premature death on the planet. 8 million people died last year just from air pollution, primarily due to fossil fuels alone. So look, these issues are complicated. Negotiations are complicated. The climate policy is complicated. But what's simple is that 86% of the emissions trapped in our atmosphere and smothering the Earth come from three things: oil, gas, and coal. And so I think right now, anyone using Trump's crusade to pollute and prop up the fossil fuel industry, when renewables are safer, they're cleaner, they're acceptable, they're accessible at scale, and they're cheaper and available at scale, I think anyone using this moment to decrease climate ambition wasn't planning on doing much in the first place. And I think the leaders that are going to be remembered are the ones that held firm and did the hard things to save lives. Leaders like Trump are going to come and go. But we can't forget that nature bats last. And we're all increasingly vulnerable to a global hydrological and climate system that is spinning out of control right now in our lifetimes. So let's not sit here and pretend the levels of ambition that we're seeing this year so far in the NDCs or the backtracking we're seeing from the corporate sector is understandable or any way acceptable. It's not. It's dangerous, it's immoral, it's now illegal under international law, and it threatens public safety and security. So I think if this hushing that we keep hearing about is not terrifying you, then you're not paying attention.
Well, let me build on a couple. Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Okay. Let me build on a couple of things that you say, and actually take this next question to you, Hashim.
Yes.
You know, we do have kind of split screens, right? You talked about in the U.S. kind of the movement towards pulling more coal and some of the things of the Trump administration helping fossil fuels really increase. But then on the flip side, there are other countries like Indonesia that is really trying to move away from coal, has some pretty bold plans to try to move away from coal by 2040, right? So Indonesia is kind of in the middle, I think, of a lot of these discussions. And one thing that I wanted to ask you about is earlier this year, after Trump pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Agreement, you spoke some about whether Indonesia should still be part of the Paris Agreement and if it made sense. And so I wonder kind of where your thinking on that is now. I know Indonesia decided to stay part of it, right? And Indonesia is investing heavily in renewables. But I just wonder, you know, 8-9 months into this administration, after all the things we've seen, kind of where you stand on that.
Yeah, so I was actually quoted during an interview with the international publication. And the question was, how does Indonesia feel about the United States pulling out of the Paris Agreement? And of course, you know, Indonesia, we have a lot of civil society, we have a lot of NGOs, and there's a lot of disgruntlement, there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of unhappiness at the major power, the United States, pulling out of the major international treaty. So a lot of Indonesians are not happy, and we're saying, look, you know, we've just started developing. We started industrial development only about 50, 60 years ago, whereas countries like the United States have been doing it since the Industrial Revolution of the 18th century. So there you have, you know, what people say is climate justice. Where's the justice, right? So there's a lot of pressure on Indonesia to phase out coal. I can tell you that's not real. That's not real. And one of the major problems that we have, the social problem, is unemployment. And unemployment, to create employment, we would need cheap energy to fuel our factories and so forth. And it's just impossible politically and socially to basically close down our coal, you know. So that's the dilemma we have. But we've decided to stay in the Paris Agreement. We're going to meet our obligations, and we've decided 75% of our future electricity generation will come from renewable energy. We are blessed. Indonesia is truly blessed. We have multiple sources of renewable energy, and we intend to exploit it. So that's basically, that's the paradox.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's eloquent because I think a lot of countries are wrestling with that, you know, especially in the global south, especially countries that are developing. Laurence, you know, you were one of the architects of the Paris Agreement, which is like by far, I think, the most significant climate agreement in history. I don't know what things were like 100% then. I wasn't as cued in as I am now. But it really feels like today we're so fractured, right? And it seems hard to imagine the next Paris Agreement. You've worked inside and outside of government and different groups. When things are fractured like this, are there different levers that can be pulled? Are there ways to kind of pull people along?
I think so, and for all the reason of the trade-offs you were describing on Indonesia, for example, or I look at my colleagues in Brazil, where of course Brazil is the 5th exporter of oil today. You see that there is of course a lot of pressure on how to deliver development at the same time just get out of polluting sources. So I think we need different levers to operate the action. I must say today, I think leaders can do so much, but they can do as much as their population will support it. Yes. That's why affordability is very important. And we see that in Europe, but we see that everywhere. How we tackle poverty directly, how climate policies are just and fair and don't, in a way, penalize the poorest size of the society, how you look at your future with the resource you have. And I have a very beautiful example, Rio Grande do Sul, a very big exporter of oil in Brazil. And you know, they have constructed a sovereign fund, and with this money, out of the oil, they want to develop the transition. And therefore, the resilience on the system, because we know that costs are here. So my point is, today, I trust more the citizen agencies and the capacity of the government to look ahead, because their horizon is much shorter. We saw how the global finance are backtracking from any climate commitments, whether it is institutional, the asset owners, but asset managers mostly, or banks. They are saying, oh, it's too dangerous. Finally, it's better to invest in oil and gas, which, as Sephora said, is not a long-term view, but at least they are earning a lot of money today. And of course, that means that every horizon of the politician are much shorter than before. So why I believe in, and really seriously, it's the agency of citizens that are concerned. And you know, all the polls at global level shows that people are concerned by the impacts. And people are concerned because governments are not delivering enough on climate policy. So what new politician needs? They need the backup. You can't have your population against you. And your population, of course, there was deep disinformation, there are manipulation, there are now, you know, in Europe, for example, you have the Russian intervention against climate policy. So number one target of the disinformation policy in Europe is around climate. And now, of course, we have the US influence to say, look, it's bad, you should abandon net zero, etc. So if politicians are not backed up by a population that demands that action, that will not happen. That's why I think it is about strengthening the civil society, but even more, asking the citizens their views, opening the discussion about the future of the kind of development they want to see. And you know, they want healthy conditions, they want a good relation with nature, they want clean air. So, but in a way, we have to build the coalition from the bottom. In Paris, it was a mix of things. We have the government, we have the local authorities, we have the civil society, we have the financial sector. Everybody came in, and we have to reconstitute that, but we can't leave the government alone. I don't think the leadership will come from there, because there are too much trade-off and pressure. But the citizen can bring the force, the agency, the energy. And that's why, in particular in these places where we are talking about many organizations, which will rally to have consultation, participation, public debates around this climate policy everywhere, and that the citizen, with their own vision, whether in Africa or Indonesia or Brazil or South Africa, they give their point of view. Because I don't think this will come from the top down. I have been in government as a prime minister office, have been, of course, an ambassador for long. You know, you feel when governments can, and they can, some can, but you see that when the forces are not there, you have to. And you know, we are at a very low cycle of the climate policy today. The pessimism, we cannot get there, we will overshoot the 1.5. But you know, we have to build the up cycle. I've been there in 30 years of discussion on climate change and biodiversity. And you know there is high and lows, but you have to prepare the high when you are at the low point. We have to build infrastructure now and to resist and stand up. And really, in this New York Climate Week, that's the moment we say we stand up against all that.
Interesting. I think you make a really good point that no matter what a government does, you can't have the population against you, right? They have to be part of it, and those kind of considerations actually come to the way that we think about covering stories on my team, because I think we all know historically climate change policy really moves the needle, but you can't just focus on that. You also want to reach people, on the ground level and try to tell stories along those lines. So I see some parallels there. Sephora, let me ask you. I mean, you thinking about the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, thinking about kind of some of the things Laurence was saying, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of parallels. There are 17 countries that have signed on, right, so far. Could you take us through an example or two of a country that has signed on, but is also really trying to straddle what their population wants, and kind of all these things that we've been talking about?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I couldn't agree more. We need to create the political space and the social license for countries to act. And addressing fossil fuels is hard because the fossil fuel industry has spent decades and billions of dollars fear-mongering about scarcity and affordability and price increases, and they're still doing that. And so, I think the best example of a country probably is Colombia. When President Petro took to the stage to announce his support for a fossil fuel treaty, he was very clear that every day Colombia is making the problem worse because they're the 5th largest coal exporter in the world. And he said, but we can't stop. We can't do it on our own. We need cooperation between countries. No one country is going to solve this. No one country, no one company. And so he talked about working together with other countries to develop new frameworks. And that's what we're doing under the Fossil Fuel Treaty. Trade mechanisms, tax mechanisms, debt relief, in order to support countries being able to do this and leave no one behind. And that's really difficult, especially in the global south. I mean, this morning we talked about $2 trillion in renewables. It's very exciting. 98% of that is in investment in the global north, not in the global south. So we need to figure out what those barriers are. We need capital to the good stuff coming into the global south, and we need that kind of cooperation. But to create the social license and political space, that's why with the fossil fuel treaty, we started from the ground up. We didn't just go and meet with the Colombian government and say, hey, we've got this big new idea. We started working with civil society in Colombia and Latin America and Africa and South Pacific and around the world. We met with scientists, Nobel laureates. So we have now 4,000 scientists who have endorsed the idea of a fossil fuel treaty. Over 4,000 NGOs or civil society groups in 120 countries who are working on the fossil fuel treaty now and who've endorsed it. The Climate Group, thank you, has endorsed the fossil fuel treaty as a concept. And so all of these organizations starting to talk about it and socialize the idea starts to build the groundwork that is going to be necessary for a country to step out like this. We have to have that movement, and we need to support social movements, and especially the people in the impacted communities, the front lines, the indigenous people who, quite frankly, have been saying this for decades, that we need to keep more fossil fuels in the ground and reduce fossil fuel expansion. But I also want to address this question of affordability, because I think what we're doing right now in a lot of places, I think what we saw yesterday in California with the new bill that Governor Newsom signed, and what we're seeing in my own country, Canada, is that I think we're seeing leaders play right into the fossil fuel industry's message box. It's absurd. Electrification and renewable energy will free millions of people from fossil fuel bills. The idea that constraining fossil fuels is going to make energy less affordable is absurd. I mean, the sun's not going to send you a bill at the end of the month. And that's why the fossil fuel industry is fighting so hard. Because right now they're making $2.8 billion a day in pure profit. And they've been doing that every day for the past 50 years. So there's a number of people, less than 1%, that are going to that have a vested interest in keeping the system as it is. But the system is the most inefficient energy system that could exist, because the majority of fossil fuels that we produce, we don't even use for our heating or our electricity or our transport. Less than 50%. Because it's such, 50% of the ships moving on the planet today are just to move other fossil fuels around.
Wow.
So if we're going to move from a fossil fuel system to a clean energy system, we need to produce actually a lot less, and it becomes a lot more affordable. So we need that truth out, and we need to be building the right projects and showing the public that it's possible. And it's not just possible, but it's not going to reduce their quality of life or make it more expensive. It's actually going to mean that more people are not choking and have asthma and can survive. And when we talk about affordability, and this is the last point I'll make, is that we have to remember how much extreme weather is already costing us. I mean, what were the LA fires, $100 billion? And right now, extreme weather is costing us $16 million an hour on the planet. And that's every hour for the last 20 years. So that's not affordable. And that's why we need to shift as quickly as possible away from fossil fuels.
Okay. We've only got a little bit of time left, so I want to go to a bit of a speed round and just ask each of you to briefly sum up what you think is a possible outcome from COP30. If we could do that, right? It's only less than 2 months away. Thinking about 10 years after Paris, COP30, first in the Amazon. Laurence, why don't we start with you?
Well, I think it's clear what we need from COP30, because there are a lot of commitments. They will maybe disappointing somehow. But I think we need, after COP, a direction of travel that put all the people that want to go together. We should stop the fragmentation. We should have the platform where there is accountability on what you do, what you don't do. Oil and gas companies cannot come to the COP and pretend they do something. So we need a place where the serious people are working together, finding the solution, again, like they did in Paris, but without the one that want failure. Okay. So I would be a selective group of countries and economic actors, local authorities and civil society teaming up together, because we need a systemic reform. In many places, we need energy system reform, but we need to operate it, not to pretend we do it. So I would say if the COP30, and they are of course very specific, I can drive, but we don't have time, but say, having people say, okay, there is now this agreement, we build on that, it is our North Star, but now we are meeting all together to implement it, and it is not, again, government only, it's all the others. And the only rule is we come if we operate, if we are serious, and if we are accountable. And that will change totally the conversation.
Okay, so I heard a lot there, but accountability and direction of travel, yeah, right, for everybody. Hashim, how about you?
Yeah, the former Prime Minister of Singapore was quoted as saying, the world is now the world minus one. And the minus one is the United States. And I think what we would hope, I would hope, Indonesia would hope that there's going to be a reaffirmation for the rest of the world to continue, right? Let's hope in 4 years' time or 8 years' time, the United States will come back. In the meantime, we shouldn't lose 4 years and 8 years. So that's the hope I have, is that this reaffirmation of the principles and the goals of Paris 2015.
Okay, yeah. Redoubling commitment. Sephora, how about you? Take us home.
I agree that I think COP30 in Belém can really change the conversation, and I have been really impressed by the leadership that we're seeing from Brazil and from the COP30 presidency, the willingness to look at ethics, to shift the conversation, to recognize indigenous leadership in the Amazon. I think it's really important. I hope we'll be seeing some strengthened agreements in Belém. Coming out of Belém, I think we're going to see a lot more countries who are joining the bloc of nations endorsing and developing the fossil fuel treaty. And today, Colombia announced that it plans to host the first ever, after Belém, Colombia will host the first ever diplomatic conference on fossil fuel phase out next year in April. And I think that that is really important, and a number of countries, I hope in Belém, will join them in developing that conference, because diplomatic conferences on critical threats to humanity, where there were vested interests and had those issues struggled to move within the UN system, have been critical. The Ottawa Convention for chemical weapons ban. And so I think this standalone diplomatic conference that Colombia has announced today, I'm hopeful that there'll be a bridge from Belém to that conversation, and that will really shift the conversation. And look, I think to bring us home, I would say we need to recognize at Belém and beyond that these companies are not going to manage their own decline. We need governments to cooperate to phase out fossil fuels, and that's how we ensure a stable climate. And the speed at which these companies are forced to decline will decide the fate of millions and the stability of our planet. Okay. So it's quite literally a fight for our lives. And right now, most leaders are either on the wrong side or not even in the ring. And so we have to, like we did here, not avoid these hard conversations in Belém. And then I think we'll start to see more progress.
Okay. All right, well, thank you. That's where we will leave it. A big thanks to the panelists, and a big thanks to all of you for being here and following along. Thank you so much. Very good, very good.